For years, officers Daniels and Pierce patrolled their streets with unshakable confidence, certain that the system would shield them from any fallout. When they pulled over Sasha during her morning run, they saw nothing more than another black woman to harass, another easy mark. They didn't see a former Marine, a woman honed by years of training to neutralize threats, to push through pain, to strike back when cornered. They stunned her with a taser, slapped cuffs on her wrists, and told her to know her place. But now the same men who once strutted with authority find themselves glancing nervously over their shoulders. Their lives are spiraling, their fear growing, and the power they once held is slipping through their fingers. Sasha doesn't crave justice. She wants them to taste the helplessness they forced on her. By the time she's through, they'll understand the cost of crossing the wrong person. The steady thud of Sasha Reynolds' running shoes against the pavement filled the quiet of the early morning. Each step was deliberate, rhythmic, a pace that let her mind wander while her body flowed on instinct. Her breathing matched the cadence of her stride, calm and even. The neighborhood was just waking up. Porch lights glowed faintly in the dawn haze. Sprinklers whispered as they sprayed the lawns, and the occasional groan of a garage door signaled someone heading off to work. The air carried the scent of wet grass and cool earth, the last traces of night giving way to the sun's slow climb. She'd picked this place for its stillness, its routine, its promise of peace after years spent in chaos. Years navigating war zones where every corner hid danger, where every step demanded caution. She'd wanted normalcy, but even as she ran, her muscles loose and her rhythm smooth, the instincts carved into her by training never fully faded. She noticed everything. The car idling too long at a stop sign 2 streets back, the faint twitch of a curtain in a house she'd never seen anyone enter, the low rumble of an engine starting behind her. Too slow, too intentional to be casual. When she heard the tires creeping up beside her, she knew. She didn't stop right away, just eased her pace, breathing steady as she flicked her eyes toward the vehicle without turning her head. A police cruiser, its black and white frame unmistakable, rolled too close, too deliberately for a routine pass. She kept her gaze ahead, her body coiled but calm, waiting. Then came the voice, sharp and slicing through the morning stillness. "Hey, stop right there." Sasha exhaled slowly, letting her run taper to a halt, her pulse even as she turned to face them. The cruiser's door creaked open, and 2 officers stepped out, their presence heavy with unspoken weight. Both were white. The older one, broad and solid with gray streaking his hair, moved with a slow, practiced ease, years in uniform etched into his stance. The younger one, wiry and sharp-edged, wore a smirk that hinted he relished this moment. The older officer adjusted his belt, his hand grazing his holster in a way that wasn't accidental. "What are you doing out here?" His tone was flat, not asking, just expecting her to confirm what he'd already decided. Sasha brushed a bead of sweat from her forehead, meeting his stare with steady calm. "Jogging," the younger one snorted, glancing at his partner. "Jogging, huh? That's funny. We got a call about someone suspicious moving through the area." The words hung between them, deliberate and loaded. Suspicious person, vague enough to bend however they pleased. Sasha let a slow breath fill her chest, her face blank. Suspicious how? The older officer tilted his head, as if weighing whether to humor her. Didn't say, just that someone was poking around houses didn't fit in. Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. "I live here." The younger one nodded slowly, that smirk still clinging to his lips. "Sure you do. Got ID on you?" She didn't blink. She'd seen this play out too many times, not because she sought it, but because it was survival. "I don't carry ID when I run." The older officer sighed, his eyes raking over her, not to verify, but to find an excuse to push harder. "That's convenient," he muttered, skepticism thick in his voice. Sasha stayed silent, offering them nothing to grab onto. The younger one, impatience flaring, stepped closer. "So let me guess. You live just down the street, right? Nice place, good job?" The mockery in his tone was blatant, daring her to bite. She didn't. The older officer shifted, giving a small, rehearsed shrug. "Thing is, we don't see you around much." Folks here notice when someone doesn't belong. There it was, the real reason. Sasha exhaled, her voice firm as steel. I belong here. The younger one chuckled low, shaking his head. Yeah? Prove it. She held her ground, unflinching. Am I being detained? The air thickened with tension, not just from this moment, but from a lifetime of moments like it, replayed across too many streets, too many years. The older officer paused, his jaw tightening before he shook his head. Not yet. It wasn't comfort, it was a warning. The sun's heat crept up her back, casting their shadows long and stark across the pavement. A few houses down, an elderly couple lingered by their driveway, pretending not to stare. A man watering his lawn angled slightly, watching without watching. She wasn't just being questioned, she was being showcased. The younger officer shifted, his fingers edging closer to his belt, a move meant to intimidate. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about power. The older one's voice cut through the heavy air. Look, cooperate and we'll be done here. Just doing our job. Sasha met his gaze, her body still, her breathing even. She could have played along, nodded, smiled, let them think they'd won so they'd leave. But she was done with that game. The younger one huffed, shaking his head. Come on, lady, don't make this hard. His hand twitched again, his stance tightening in a way only someone trained to spot it would catch. Sasha didn't budge, but something shifted inside her, the weight of combat settling back into her bones. This wasn't over. She'd faced worse than this. Warlords, insurgents, missions where a single misstep meant death. This suburban street, these two overconfident cops looking for a fight, was different but familiar. The younger one's smirk was gone, his shoulders squared, his stance widening. He wasn't waiting for obedience anymore. He wanted defiance. The older one stayed quiet, his patience thinning, but his control intact. You're making this tougher than it needs to be, the younger one snapped, his fingers hovering too close to his belt. Just answer the questions and stop acting shady. Sasha exhaled slowly, hands visible, knowing how fast they could twist this into something uglier. I've answered you. I live here. I was running. That's not a crime, the older officer's jaw ticked. You're refusing to show ID. I told you I don't carry it when I run, she repeated, her tone steady. The younger one sighed dramatically, stepping closer. See? This is the issue. People like you. He stopped as the older one raised a hand, his face cold, calculating. He glanced down the street, noting the growing eyes. The couple, the man with the hose, shadows shifting behind curtains. They didn't like witnesses, but they weren't ready to let her go either. The older officer sighed, his voice deceptively casual. All right, turn around, hands on your head. Sasha's fingers curled slightly, heat flaring beneath her skin. What's the charge? You're obstructing an investigation, he said, his face unreadable. We're holding you until we confirm who you are. Detaining, not arresting, just dragging her off the street to remind her where she stood. The younger one's smirk crept back. Unless you want to resist, he added, his hand now on his taser. Sasha knew the drill. Comply, and they'd parade her through booking, shame her, make sure the neighbors saw. Resist, and they'd call her a threat, use force. Either way, they won. Her pulse stayed steady, but her instincts screamed to fight. She wasn't reckless, though. I'm not resisting, she said, raising her hand slightly but not turning. I'm asking what gives you the right to detain me without cause. The older officer's mouth thinned. Last chance. She didn't move. The younger one scoffed. Told you she was scoping houses. The older one nodded as if agreeing with himself. Yeah, and not cooperating. Sasha's teeth clenched. This was their show, a script to justify what they'd already planned. The older one lifted his radio. Dispatch, we've got a suspect refusing to comply. Send backup. Her jaw tightened as the radio crackled back. They didn't need help. They wanted a spectacle. Minutes later, another cruiser rolled up, lights flashing silently. A third officer stepped out, and the air shifted. Unjustified stop turned dangerous. She heard a door creak nearby. Someone filming. Good. The backup officer approached. What's the situation? The older one didn't hesitate. Possible suspect casing houses. Won't show ID. Won't cooperate. A seamless lie. The backup officer nodded, hand on his holster, taking position. Sasha took a slow breath. I told you I live here. The younger one laughed. Then why are you being difficult? Her voice hardened. Because I know my rights. Something flickered in the older officer's eyes. Irritation, maybe amusement. Then the younger one's hand flashed to his taser. She saw it a split second before he fired. The sharp crack of the electrodes split the air, and a jolt ripped through her, locking her muscles, searing pain exploding in her limbs. Her knees buckled, her breath choked out as she hit the pavement hard. The world blurred, the asphalt scraping her cheek, the smell of burnt ozone thick. Voices drifted through the haze. Get her hands, stop resisting. Rough hands yanked her arms back, steel cuffs biting into her wrists. Her vision swam as she gasped, the current still trembling through her. She heard murmurs, neighbors, phones clicking, scattered whispers she couldn't catch. She hadn't resisted, yet here she was, face down, cuffed, dragged into a cruiser for existing where they said she didn't belong. The pavement stung as a knee pressed into her back, pinning her harder. Her arms twisted, the cuffs cutting deeper. She focused on her breathing, steadying it despite the twitching in her muscles. They muttered above her, their movements smooth, practiced, a machine that had done this too often. Stop resisting. She wasn't. Her body was still sluggish from the shock, but that line was for the crowd now gathering, for the phones recording, an excuse to cover their tracks. The onlookers grew, neighbors stepping out, some with cameras raised, none stepping in. Sasha's breathing held, her eyes catching what she could from the ground. Faces half hidden by dawn's glare stood frozen, some worried, some cautious, all still. She knew why. Fear not of this, but of what happened if they intervened. A hand gripped her arm, hauling her up. The cuffs dug in as her shaky legs found balance. The younger officer, Pierce, smirked, sharper now, edged with triumph. See what happens when you don't play nice? His voice was low, his grip tight on her arm as he leaned in. You people never learn. Sasha's jaw locked, but she stayed silent. The older one, Daniels, scanned the crowd, reading the tension, the cameras. He didn't like this. The attention. He turned to Pierce. Let's move her before this gets messy. They marched her to the cruiser, her wrists aching, her steps forced. She kept her head up, her face blank, refusing to show weakness. As they shoved her toward the back seat, she caught the eye of an older black man filming from his porch, his expression grim. She knew his thoughts. This wouldn't change a thing. It had happened before. It had happened again. Pierce pushed her in hard, and she braced herself against the far door as it slammed shut. Through the window, she saw the neighbors, the unease, the silent glances. She didn't expect rescue. She'd fought her own battles too long for that. Daniels took the wheel, Pierce beside him, casual as if this were routine. The radio crackled. Unit 19 en route. Daniels responded, clipped and professional. Affirmative. Bringing suspect in. Suspect. The words sank into the stale air around her. Pierce smirked at her in the rear view, drumming his fingers on the dash. Got to say, you made this way harder than it needed to be. Sasha didn't reply, her mind shifting past the pain, past the cuffs, past the ringing in her ears. This wasn't her first time restrained, but it was the first like this. The cruiser pulled away, the neighborhood fading, the crowd's whispers replaced by the hum of tires. Pierce chuckled, glancing at Daniels. Bet you 20 she's got a record. Want to check? Daniels gripped the wheel, silent, eyes fixed ahead. Sasha tilted her head. I hope you do. Might learn something useful. Pierce laughed again. Man, you really don't get it, do you? Doesn't matter who you are. You're still right there. She met his eyes in the mirror, calm. I know exactly who I am. He rolled his eyes and turned away. Yeah, and where's that getting you? The station loomed ahead, the cuffs heavy, the ache dull but constant. She wasn't thinking about booking or the cell. She was thinking beyond to what came after. The cuffs were gone, but their mark lingered on Sasha's wrists, a faint ache echoing the abuse of power she'd endured. She sat in a drab, windowless room at the station, gray walls pressing in, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The scratched table bore years of wear, scuffs and gouges telling stories of others who'd sat here. It was a space meant to shrink you, to silence you with its heavy air and isolation. Sasha felt neither small nor quiet. They'd left her there over an hour, no charges, no paperwork, just waiting, a tactic to grind her down, to make her doubt resistance was worth it. She'd faced worse, in harsher places, under graver stakes. This, cuffed for running in her own neighborhood, was almost absurd by comparison. The door groaned open, and Daniels entered, his stride slow and assured, uniform pristine, belt perfectly aligned, every inch radiating the arrogance of a man who thought himself untouchable. He scraped the chair across the tile, sat, and exhaled like this was a chore for him, not a violation of her rights. "Well," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "looks like you're clean." Sasha's face stayed stone. Daniels tilted his head, probing for a crack, waiting for fear or anger to slip through. He'd wait forever. "You're free to go," he added, lacing his fingers together. No charges, just a misunderstanding. The word hung hollow between them, a flimsy lie. She'd been tackled, tased, cuffed, and hauled in for nothing, and now they wanted her to shrug it off. "You tased and arrested me for jogging," she said, her voice even. Daniel's smirk held. "Because you wouldn't cooperate." There it was, the same tired excuse, twisting the blame onto her. She didn't flinch. He leaned forward, lowering his tone like he was doing her a favor. "Look, I'll be straight. This doesn't have to be a thing. Keep your head down, no more trouble. But if you push, well," he sighed, feigning regret. "We both know how that ends." Her nails pressed into her palms beneath the table. She'd heard threats like this before, in war zones, in shadowed rooms where the stakes were life or death. "Are we done?" Daniels exhaled, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, we're done." Minutes later, she walked out, her belongings shoved back at her with no apology, just the desk sergeant's smirk. They'd misjudged her. She wasn't the type to let it go. She was the type to plan, to wait, to strike. By morning, Sasha sat in internal affairs, armed with details, policy breaches, neighbor footage, every law they'd trampled. She knew the system rarely punished its own, that most complaints vanished into the void. This wasn't about justice. It was about marking her presence, ensuring Daniels and Pierce knew she wouldn't fade quietly. The senior investigator, a tired man in a Navy suit, skimmed her report with jaded eyes. When she finished, he set his pen down, exhaling. "We'll review the footage and investigate. If violations are found, we'll act." His if, not when, told her everything. "We'll be in touch," he added, nodding dismissively. She left, expecting nothing. They'd bury it, protect their own. But that was fine. This was her opening move. Sasha knew retaliation would come. Officers like Daniels and Pierce didn't let complaints slide. They'd grind her down, send a message. It started small, her trash bin tipped over, contents strewn across her driveway. She cleaned it up, unfazed. Then her car, scratches, deep and deliberate, first on the side, then the trunk, etched with slow precision. No coincidence. She installed a camera by her garage, watching, waiting. It escalated. Dawn revealed an unmarked car down the street, not close but with a clear view of her house. She knew every car on her block. This wasn't one. It sat there, engine humming, then crept away after 20 minutes. She didn't react, didn't call it in, just noted it. Days later, she came home from the gym, spotting a shadow flicker near her house. She didn't flinch, grabbing the knife under her seat, stepping out to scan her yard. The motion light tripped, trash rifled again, no valuables taken, just her mail torn open. They were digging into her life. She straightened, unafraid. This was textbook intimidation, surveillance, disruptions, warnings. She'd seen it in war zones, used to break people. It wasn't breaking her, it was pissing her off. At her dining table, papers spread out, scratched car, trash bins, lurking car. She saw the pattern. Her phone buzzed. "Jamal." She answered, bracing herself. "You still up?" His voice was tight, angry. Don't sleep much. A pause. Heard what's happening? Of course he had. Jamal, a defense attorney, always knew. Talk to me, he said. She traced the scratches on her keys. They're watching me. That car's on my street most nights. They've been through my trash, and now... She flipped through envelopes, landing on one. No stamp, just her name. She opened it. Drop the complaint. Walk away. She exhaled. Now I'm getting letters. Jamal sighed. Don't tell me to drop it. I'm telling you to watch yourself, he corrected. You know how this goes. They don't play clean. She knew. She didn't care. This could ruin you, he said softer. Already started, she replied. Yesterday, her firm emailed a security clearance review. Her counterterrorism work, her lifeline to civilian life, was at risk. They're boxing you in, Jamal snapped. If they pull it, you're done. Blacklisted. She drummed her fingers. Not the first time someone's tried to burn me. Last time you had the core. Now you're solo. Silence. Just think about what's next, he said. I'll back you, but be smart. I'll handle it, she said, hanging up, staring at the letter. They thought fear would stop her. They were wrong. Sasha didn't wait for their next move. She struck first. She called Lena Carter, ex-Navy cyber ops, now a private contractor with a knack for digging dirt. Please tell me this isn't a friendly chat, Lena said. Need research, Sasha replied. Lena laughed. You mean recon. Someone pissed you off. Sasha glanced out her window. The unmarked car was back. Filed a complaint against 2 cops. They're making my life hell. I need their weaknesses. Names, Daniels and Pierce. Brent Daniels, Doug Pierce, local PD. Typing clicked in the background. I'll call when I've got something, Lena said, hanging up. 3 hours later, Lena called. You were right. They've got dirt. Sasha's grip tightened. Go. Daniels first, Lena said. 20 years on the force, looks clean. Awards, community stuff. But his money's off. Off the books real estate, shell LLCs, cash deposits beyond his pay. Either bribes or laundering. Sasha nodded. Good. And Pierce? Lena snorted. He's a wreck, gambling addict. Started small, now he's drowning. Poker, betting, underground crap. Deep in debt, draining savings, still short. Sasha's mind raced. Daniels was careful, Pierce desperate, perfect cracks to exploit. This is enough, she said. Lena paused. This won't end neat, you know that? Sasha smiled. I'm banking on it. Daniels thought he was untouchable, hiding behind his badge in the system. That was his flaw. He believed his walls were solid. Sasha started small, tipping a journalist anonymously. Vague but juicy. Shady property deals tied to cops. The article hit next morning, a subtle jab. Undisclosed real estate transfers sparked questions about police involvement. Daniels walked into the precinct like always. Coffee, nods, until he saw the email. A financial clarification request. No accusation, just a nudge to unsettle him. 2 days later, a for sale sign sprouted on one of his properties. He yanked it out, baffled, then got a call. Listings were live, his name attached. Take it down, he barked. Bad optics, the realtor warned. Paranoia took root. The final blow came at a hidden rental. Quiet, buried under LLCs. He arrived late, sensing something off. Inside, a folder waited on the counter. Transactions, records, the article, and a note. How deep will they dig? He froze, jaw tight. No break-in, no report. He couldn't risk questions. For once, he was the prey. Pierce was easier, sloppy, impulsive. His gambling debts were her weapon. She fed his loan sharks his badge number, schedule, drained accounts. They'd handle the rest. Within a week, he was a mess. Twitchy, sleepless, jumping at his phone. She tracked him to a dive bar, slipping a note under his wiper as he fumbled his keys. Pay what you owe before they collect. He froze, eyes wild, scanning the lot. Days later, she left fake loan statements on his cruiser's hood. He tore them open, sweat beading, hands shaking as he saw the numbers. The last push was a call, distorted voice. Your time's up. He spun, gun half drawn, then found another note. You know what happens to guys who don't pay. He broke, erratic, snapping at everyone, dodging routines. One night, he snapped at a man across the street. Detective Julian Reyes undercover. Pierce pulled his gun, frantic. Reyes stayed calm, badge out. Lower it, he said. Pierce backed off, trembling, realizing he'd just tanked himself. Daniels unraveled quieter, drinking more, slipping up. A bar fight landed him bloodied and suspended. Pierce's meltdown hit the news. Ex-cop, buried complaints resurfacing. His victim spoke. The department cut ties. Daniels' real estate schemes blew open. IRS probes, frozen accounts, resignation. He fled, a moving truck trailing him out of town. Sasha stood on her porch as Daniels drove off, his hunched form a shadow of the man he'd been. Lena joined her. "You won," she said. "Took them down clean." Sasha nodded. "Feels good." "But you're still waiting for something," Lena pressed. Sasha didn't deny it. Peace never lasted. Jamal arrived later, resigned. "You did it," he said. "I get it. Dinner?" She smirked. "You're paying." He laughed, heading off. She lingered, locking her door. The click final. The street was hers again. Quiet, safe, for now. Trouble always came back, and she'd be ready.